It was late in the evening when he pulled into the small gas station off the highway. The sun had already dipped below the horizon, and the dim lights of the station flickered slightly, casting long shadows across the asphalt. He had driven several hours, tired but alert, needing to refuel before heading home. The air smelled faintly of gasoline mixed with the scent of fried food from the nearby convenience store. He parked near a pump and got out of his car, stretching his legs briefly. It had been a long day, and the quiet of the station seemed like a small relief. As he went to pay for his gas inside, he noticed a few other customers browsing the shelves. Some were in a hurry, others were just lingering, sipping drinks or checking their phones. The hum of the fluorescent lights mixed with the soft background music playing over the speakers. Everything seemed normal. He finished pumping his gas, paid at the counter, and stepped back outside. He was careful to make sure his car was locked and placed his receipt in his pocket. A small routine, a momentary pause in an otherwise busy life. Then he noticed the 2 police cars pull into the station. Their lights were off, but their presence was unmistakable. The cars came to a slow stop behind him, and he watched as 2 officers stepped out. Their uniforms were crisp, their movements deliberate. One of them glanced quickly in his direction and then spoke to the other in low tones, barely audible. He tried to ignore them, assuming they were there for something else. He had done nothing wrong, and he had nothing to hide. Without warning, one of the officers approached him directly, voice sharp and demanding.
"Step over here, sir," the officer said.
His tone left no room for questions. He raised his hand slightly, keeping his posture calm. "Is there a problem, officer?" he asked politely. The officer looked him up and down, eyes narrowing. "We received a report about suspicious activity. Stay right there while we check something," the officer said, ignoring the politeness in his voice. The other officer stood behind, arms crossed, watching intently. The casual quiet of the gas station suddenly felt heavy, tense. Customers in the distance started noticing the interaction, some pausing to watch. He followed the officer's instructions calmly, asking questions in a neutral tone, trying to understand the reason for this sudden confrontation. "Can you tell me what this is about?" he asked. The first officer hesitated for a moment, then said something vague about checking identification. He handed over his ID without resistance. The officer examined it closely, his brow furrowed. He could feel the judgment in the gaze, the unspoken assumptions hanging in the air. He reminded himself to stay composed. Any sudden movement or harsh word could escalate things unnecessarily. While the officer continued looking at his identification, the other officer started moving around, scanning the area, as if confirming that everything else was in order. Customers had started stepping back, keeping their distance but observing quietly. A sense of unease had settled over the small station. He could hear the faint click of cameras from phones, people recording the scene. He felt the eyes on him, the judgment and the curiosity, but he maintained his calm. He knew that reacting emotionally would only make the situation worse. Then came the words that made his stomach tighten. "We're going to have to place you under arrest," the officer said. The phrase felt heavy and incomprehensible. He had not committed any crime. He was polite, following the law, simply trying to go about his day. He looked at the officer, his voice measured and calm, yet firm. "I don't understand. Can you explain why you're arresting me?" The officer's expression did not change. There was no apology, no hesitation. Just authority and an assumption that he must have done something wrong. He was guided toward one of the police cars. The cold metal of the vehicle, the faint smell of disinfectant inside made the situation feel even more surreal. He was aware of every movement, every command, responding only as needed. The officers remained serious, focused on their procedure. He complied, keeping his hands visible, not resisting in any way. Each step was deliberate. He was careful to remain calm, knowing that losing control could worsen an already tense situation. As he was placed inside the police car, he could hear murmurs from the other customers. Some whispered among themselves while others recorded with their phones. He tried not to focus on it, instead taking deep breaths, grounding himself. He reminded himself that he had done nothing wrong. He had rights. He had always respected the law, and he intended to continue doing so even under these circumstances. The ride to the station was quiet, filled with a tension that seemed to thicken with each passing minute. The officers spoke little, focusing on their duties. He stayed seated, hands folded, eyes forward. He observed their body language, noting their seriousness, their focus. Inside, he was calm, but the unfairness of the situation was impossible to ignore. He thought about the moments that had led him here, moments of routine that had suddenly turned into a confrontation. It felt absurd yet painfully real. He reflected on the world around him, on how people sometimes make judgments based on appearance, assumptions that could have serious consequences. He thought of the many people who had faced similar situations, of the injustices that went unnoticed because the victims were often silenced by fear. He promised himself he would remain composed, that he would respond with dignity and clarity. He knew that anger or fear would only reinforce the officer's assumptions. Arriving at the station, he was led inside, the echo of footsteps on the tile floor emphasizing the seriousness of the moment. The officers continued their protocol, taking him to a waiting area where he was asked to sit. Other staff members observed quietly, noting his calm and respectful demeanor. He answered questions politely, never raising his voice, never allowing the situation to provoke him beyond reason. His mind stayed focused on clarity, on ensuring that he represented himself truthfully and respectfully. Throughout the process, he remained aware of the cameras, the witnesses, and the potential consequences. Every word mattered, every gesture could be interpreted. He maintained a steady composure, demonstrating that dignity in the face of adversity was not only possible but necessary. He knew that how he handled this situation could influence the outcome, could even serve as an example for others in similar circumstances. Hours passed slowly. He was subjected to routine questioning, fingerprinting, and paperwork. Each step was methodical, procedural, but he could feel the underlying tension between the officers. Something in their manner hinted at uncertainty, perhaps recognition of their own assumptions. Though he did not yet know the full extent of it, he stayed calm, focusing on the present moment, observing, listening, responding with patience. Finally, as the process continued, one of the officers looked up from the paperwork with a strange expression. Something seemed to shift in their demeanor, though he could not yet understand why. He remained polite, answering questions as needed, keeping his posture respectful. It was a test of patience, a demonstration of self-control. He reminded himself that this was only part of a longer story, a moment that would soon reveal truths he had yet to discover. Even in the midst of confusion and injustice, he felt a sense of quiet strength. He had faced challenges before, had maintained integrity under pressure, and would continue to do so. The gas station, the officers, the witnesses, all of it was a part of an unexpected confrontation, but he was determined to remain composed, to navigate the situation with dignity and clarity. The night stretched on, heavy with tension, but he stayed focused, aware that the story was far from over. Each moment was a step toward understanding, toward resolution, and he met it with calm and determination, ready for whatever came next. The room at the police station felt cold and quiet, except for the occasional shuffle of papers and the soft hum of fluorescent lights. He sat on the bench, hands folded calmly in his lap, observing everything around him. The officers had left for a moment to complete some paperwork, and he could feel the weight of the silence pressing down. He had never imagined that a simple stop at a gas station could turn into this ordeal. He took a deep breath, steadying himself, knowing that how he carried himself now could make a difference. Other people in the station watched curiously. Some whispered to each other, while others pretended not to notice. He remained polite to everyone, greeting a staff member with a simple nod when they passed by. Even though he felt a knot of tension in his stomach, he refused to show frustration. His mind raced with questions about how such a routine day could escalate into this, but he reminded himself to stay calm, to act with dignity and clarity. When the officers returned, they brought a mix of files and forms, their expressions unreadable. One of them looked at him sharply and asked, "Can you tell us again where you were headed tonight?" He answered without hesitation, speaking clearly and respectfully. He explained his journey, the long hours of driving, and why he had stopped at the gas station. His tone remained calm and factual. There was no exaggeration, no defensiveness, just honesty. He knew that facts mattered more than emotions in situations like this. The officer scribbled something on a form, glancing up occasionally but saying little. The other officer moved around, checking the monitors and making notes. Their movements were precise, almost mechanical, but there was a sense of unease underlying them. He noticed the subtle change in their demeanor, the brief hesitation when they looked at him. He did not know what it meant yet, but he stayed composed, attentive to every detail. At one point, one officer asked him to recount his actions at the gas station, and he described the process of pumping gas, paying at the counter, and locking his car. He spoke calmly, carefully, emphasizing that he had followed all rules and been polite to everyone. The officers listened but remained tight-lipped. He could feel the tension in the room, the quiet judgment, yet he refused to let it break his composure. He reminded himself that his behavior could influence the outcome, could demonstrate that he was not a threat, and that he deserved fair treatment. As he waited, he reflected on the broader implications of the situation. He thought about the countless stories he had heard, people treated unfairly because of the color of their skin, the assumptions made without evidence. He knew that these biases were subtle, often hidden beneath the surface of everyday interactions, but their consequences were real and harmful. He resolved to remain calm and articulate, to respond to injustice with clarity and integrity rather than anger. During the questioning, he asked politely for clarification about why he had been detained. The first officer gave vague answers, shifting his gaze and avoiding direct responses. He pressed gently, repeating his questions, showing patience and respect. The officer's body language shifted slightly, a hint of discomfort appearing in their posture. He noticed it but did not react overtly. Instead, he continued to answer any questions asked, remaining firm and steady in his demeanor. Witnesses continued to watch quietly. A few had taken out their phones, recording the interaction discreetly. He was aware of them, the way they observed and documented, but he focused on his own composure. He understood the importance of presence and perception, how remaining calm could set a powerful example, especially in a situation where assumptions and prejudice were at play. He thought of the young people watching, learning from the scene, and he wanted to show them that dignity and patience could be a form of quiet strength. Time passed slowly, each minute stretching longer than the last. The officers went through routine procedures, asking for personal details, taking notes and verifying information. He complied with each request without complaint, maintaining a respectful tone. Even when the questions felt redundant or unnecessary, he responded politely, knowing that losing patience could only worsen the situation. He reminded himself that every interaction, every word mattered. How he responded could shape the next steps and the overall impression of the encounter. Despite the calm he projected, he felt the weight of frustration and disbelief pressing down. He had done nothing to deserve this treatment. He reflected on the importance of staying composed, not letting the injustice dictate his emotions. He focused on breathing steadily, grounding himself in the present moment. He thought about his family, his responsibilities, and the life he had built, all of which fueled his determination to remain dignified and rational. He also noticed the subtle shifts in the officer's behavior. One of them seemed increasingly uneasy, glancing at his badge and then back at him as if double-checking information. The other officer's jaw tightened slightly, a hint of recognition passing in his eyes. He did not yet know the significance of this, but he sensed that the situation might change once the officers realized the truth about who he was. He remained calm, knowing that this moment could be pivotal, yet he could not let hope or anticipation alter his composure. Throughout the ordeal, he maintained a clear and steady voice, answering every question with patience. He refrained from sarcasm, from raising his tone, and from showing anger. Even when the questions seemed unnecessary or biased, he responded with factual clarity. Each answer was deliberate, intended to communicate honesty and respect and to prevent any misunderstanding that could escalate the situation. He understood the delicate balance between compliance and asserting his rights, and he navigated it carefully. He also reflected internally on the human aspect of the officers. While their actions were misguided, he considered that they too were influenced by systemic pressures and ingrained assumptions. He did not excuse the behavior, but maintained awareness that the situation was complex. This awareness helped him remain calm and avoid reacting with hostility. He focused on what he could control: his own behavior, his words, and his ability to represent himself with dignity. Hours continued to pass. Each new form, each question, and each verification added to the slow progression of the process. He observed the other staff members, their professional distance and occasional glances at him that carried curiosity. He remained polite, acknowledging them with a nod or brief greeting. His calm composure contrasted sharply with the officer's occasional signs of unease, creating an unspoken tension in the room. It was clear that his behavior was affecting the dynamic, subtly challenging the assumptions that had led to his arrest. Finally, a moment came when one of the officers paused mid-task, looking at his identification and then at him, a flicker of realization passing through their expression. He remained seated, calm and neutral, waiting for them to speak. He did not interrupt or comment, understanding that this moment would unfold on its own. His patience and quiet strength continued to set the tone, demonstrating that composure in the face of injustice could command attention and respect. Even in this stressful and unfair situation, he maintained his focus on fairness, respect, and dignity. Each step, from answering questions to interacting with officers and staff, was deliberate. He was aware of the witnesses, aware of the potential impact of his behavior beyond the room, and he carried himself accordingly. The experience, though challenging, became a lesson in patience and self-control, a reminder that even when treated unjustly, one could respond with integrity and poise. As the night wore on, he continued to wait, answering questions as needed, observing the subtle changes in the officer's behavior. The quiet tension in the room shifted slightly, though he could not yet understand why. He remained calm, confident that the truth would eventually surface and that he could navigate the situation without compromising his dignity. Each moment was a test of patience, a demonstration of resilience, and a quiet assertion of his humanity, even in the midst of a deeply unfair situation. The hum of the fluorescent lights in the police station seemed louder than ever, echoing in the tense silence that had settled over the room. He sat calmly, hands resting on his lap, eyes observing every detail with quiet patience. The officers had been going through the usual paperwork and verification processes for what felt like hours. He had answered all their questions politely, repeated his statements calmly, and complied with their routine procedures. Yet despite his composed demeanor, he felt a mixture of frustration and disbelief. How could a simple visit to a gas station turn into such an ordeal? He did not know what the officers would discover next, but he remained confident that truth and patience would guide the situation to a resolution. The first officer returned to his side, holding a folder with his personal details and identification. As the officer glanced over the information, a subtle shift in expression caught his eye. The previously stern, unyielding demeanor had softened slightly, replaced by something that seemed like hesitation or uncertainty. The second officer moved nearby, also glancing at the documents, a flicker of recognition in his eyes that he could not yet understand. He continued to sit calmly, maintaining a composed presence, waiting for whatever revelation was about to unfold. The officer began speaking, his voice lower than before, tinged with an edge of uncertainty. "Can you confirm your place of work?" he asked. He answered without hesitation, clearly and respectfully, stating his position and the responsibilities he held. As soon as the words left his mouth, he noticed the officer's hand tremble slightly, a rare sign of human vulnerability breaking through the earlier display of authority. The other officer's jaw tightened, and a small frown appeared on his face as he exchanged a glance with his colleague. It was in that brief, almost imperceptible moment that everything started to shift. The realization began to dawn on the officers that this man, who they had so quickly assumed to be suspicious and unworthy of trust, held a position of authority far beyond their own. Their assumptions, based on superficial judgments and biases, were crumbling in an instant. He remained calm, observing their reactions without a single outward display of triumph or impatience. He knew that the revelation would speak louder than words. One officer swallowed hard and muttered at something under his breath, barely audible. He did not react outwardly, but noticed the tremor in their voices, the slight hesitation in their movements. He understood that the balance of power in the room had shifted, and that his calm, respectful presence had amplified the contrast between his demeanor and the officer's earlier assumptions. Every action, every polite answer, had contributed to the moment of revelation. The second officer finally spoke, his tone noticeably different, carrying a mixture of confusion and apprehension. "You're a judge?" he asked, almost as if speaking the words aloud could confirm or deny the reality. He answered calmly, simply stating that he was indeed a sitting judge, handling cases in the jurisdiction that included this very station. The officer's expressions shifted from arrogance and authority to shock and disbelief. They had made assumptions without any knowledge of the truth, and the realization hit them hard. The tension in the room thickened as the officers struggled to process the situation. They had treated him with suspicion, arrested him without cause, and now they were confronted with the undeniable truth that he held the very position that symbolized law and justice in their community. He maintained his composure, knowing that his calm and measured response would only further underscore the contrast between their actions and his integrity. He could feel the weight of the moment, not just in the room but beyond it, in the unseen eyes of those who might hear about the story later. He understood the power of patience, of composure, and of dignity in the face of injustice. His calm presence was a silent assertion of authority, demonstrating that the true measure of respect was not given by assumptions or uniforms, but by actions, honesty, and integrity. The officers shifted nervously, glancing at each other, then back at him. One of them cleared his throat, searching for words that could justify or explain the mistake, but nothing came. Their silence was punctuated only by the soft sound of papers shuffling and the faint hum of the fluorescent lights above. He remained seated, quiet, observing, allowing them the moment to fully grasp the gravity of their error. He did not need to speak. His mere presence and composure communicated everything. He reflected inwardly on the irony of the situation. How quickly people could judge based on appearances. How easily assumptions could lead to humiliation and injustice. He had experienced countless instances in life where bias and prejudice created unnecessary conflict. Yet he had learned the power of remaining calm and collected. In this moment, his experience and patience were not only protecting him but also serving as a lesson for the officers, a subtle reminder of the importance of respect and fairness. One of the officers finally spoke, his voice shaky and unsure. We didn't know," he admitted, his earlier confidence completely eroded. The words hung in the air, revealing the depth of their error and the sudden awareness of their own misjudgment. He nodded slightly, acknowledging the statement without anger or scorn. His calm acceptance further highlighted the contrast between their impulsive actions and his measured response. He could see the tension in their bodies, the way their hands fidgeted and their eyes avoided direct contact. It was a human reaction to realizing a mistake of this magnitude, and he did not gloat or press further. Instead, he allowed the moment to unfold naturally, trusting that the truth and fairness inherent in his actions would guide the resolution. He understood that humility and patience could be more powerful than confrontation. The other officer attempted to regain composure, straightening his posture and taking a deep breath. He seemed to be struggling with embarrassment and the realization of how unjustly they had treated him. He answered questions with a stammer, trying to explain or justify the earlier arrest, but the words fell flat. The impact of their assumptions and biases was now undeniable, and the contrast between their actions and his calm dignity was striking. He spoke gently, almost conversationally, reminding them of the importance of respect and professionalism. He did not scold or lecture, but used measured words to highlight how assumptions could lead to serious consequences. His tone was calm, firm, and composed, reinforcing the lesson that had been quietly unfolding throughout the ordeal. The officers listened, some nodding, others remaining silent, absorbing the unexpected truth of their own behavior. As the realization settled in, he noticed the subtle shift in the room. The tension that had felt heavy and oppressive earlier began to dissipate, replaced by a quiet acknowledgement of the truth. He maintained his composure, observing the change without comment, letting the officers process their mistake fully. It was a moment of clarity, a turning point in the interaction, and he allowed it to unfold naturally. Throughout the encounter, he had remained aware of the human element. He understood that people could make mistakes, act on biases, and misjudge situations, but he also knew that dignity, patience, and honesty could reveal the truth more effectively than anger or confrontation. His calm demeanor had been a silent assertion of integrity, demonstrating the power of measured response even in the face of unjust treatment. The officers finally seemed to comprehend the full weight of their error. Their earlier confidence had been replaced with humility, apprehension, and an understanding of the seriousness of their actions. He continued to sit quietly, observing, allowing them to internalize the lesson without interference. Every subtle gesture, every controlled response from him reinforced the message of patience, dignity, and the importance of fairness. He thought briefly about the witnesses outside, about how they would perceive the unfolding events if they ever learned the full story. He hoped that his calm and composed behavior would leave an impression, showing that strength and integrity often come from restraint, clarity, and the measured assertion of one's rights. This experience, though unfair and unexpected, was also a teaching moment, not just for the officers but for everyone who would eventually hear about it. Hours seemed to pass quickly in this strange, tension-filled environment. The officers continued their routine tasks, but now with a noticeable difference in attitude. They treated him with cautious respect, their previous assumptions replaced by acknowledgement of his position and character. He remained polite, responding to any remaining questions with clarity and calmness, never allowing the memory of the earlier arrest to provoke him. In that moment, he realized the power of patience and composure. His dignity, calm voice, and careful responses had not only protected him, but had revealed the truth to the officers without confrontation or anger. He had demonstrated that even in situations of injustice, one could maintain control, assert integrity, and influence the behavior of others simply through calm, measured presence. As the night wore on, he reflected on the events quietly, thinking about the lessons learned and the subtle yet powerful ways that patience and dignity could alter the course of an unfair situation. He understood that the encounter at the gas station, though stressful and humiliating, had become an opportunity to demonstrate human resilience, the importance of fairness, and the ability to respond to prejudice with quiet strength and unwavering integrity. The night was far from over, but the truth had begun to emerge, and with it came a new awareness for everyone involved. The room felt charged with a new energy, one that replaced the earlier tension with a mix of shock, humility, and awareness. He sat calmly, hands on his lap, observing the officers as they tried to process the revelation. Their earlier arrogance had been replaced with unease and hesitation. He could see the conflict in their eyes, the recognition that their actions had been hasty, unfair, and influenced by bias. He did not react with anger or sarcasm, understanding that the lesson would be more powerful if conveyed with calm authority, rather than confrontation. One of the officers finally spoke, his voice low and uncertain. We shouldn't have done that," he admitted. The words were simple, yet heavy with the weight of realization. He nodded gently, acknowledging the statement without scorn. His calm, patient presence amplified the contrast between their behavior and his measured response, demonstrating the quiet power of dignity in situations of injustice. He began to address the officers directly, his voice firm but respectful. "I understand mistakes happen," he said, "but it's important to recognize the role of assumptions and bias in your actions. You have a responsibility to treat everyone fairly, regardless of appearance. This is not just about the law, it's about respect and humanity." His words were deliberate, emphasizing the broader lesson without attacking or belittling them. The officers listened, some nodding, others remaining silent, absorbing the unexpected guidance from someone they had so quickly misjudged. The other officer shifted uncomfortably, glancing around the room as if searching for a way to regain control. We thought," he started, then stopped, realizing that any excuse would only reinforce the error. He looked at him with a mixture of shame and curiosity, sensing the gravity of the earlier mistake. He continued calmly, reinforcing the lesson. "It's easy to act on assumptions, but it's harder and more important to pause, observe, and treat each person with fairness and respect. That's what upholds the law and maintains trust in the community." The officers remained mostly silent, the weight of their actions settling over them. He could see the internal struggle, the embarrassment, and the dawning awareness of how quickly bias can affect judgment. He spoke gently, allowing space for reflection. "You had a choice in that moment, even if it was instinctive. Every interaction is an opportunity to do what is right, not just what seems convenient or expected. Understanding that can change the way you serve the community." He noticed subtle changes in their demeanor. Shoulders that had been stiff were slowly relaxing, eyes no longer scanning for confrontation but instead focusing on understanding. Their hands fidgeted slightly, a sign of discomfort but also of acknowledgement. He maintained a composed posture, letting them process, showing that calm authority could teach lessons more effectively than anger or punitive behavior. The room was quiet, except for the soft hum of the fluorescent lights. Witnesses in the room had begun to notice the shift in tone. The earlier tension had transformed into a moment of reflection and instruction. He could feel the presence of others in the room, not as an audience but as silent participants in a learning moment. He knew that the way he carried himself would resonate beyond the immediate encounter, leaving a mark of integrity and patience. One officer finally met his gaze, voice wavering slightly. "We didn't realize. We acted too quickly," he said. He didn't finish the sentence, but the meaning was clear. He nodded gently, maintaining calm authority. "It's important to acknowledge it and learn from it. Understanding the impact of our actions is the first step toward doing better next time." His tone was even, measured and firm, reinforcing the lesson without judgment. He reflected on the broader implications of the situation. How often had assumptions led to unnecessary conflict, humiliation, and injustice? He thought about the community, about the countless interactions that could be influenced by prejudice, and about the responsibility of those in positions of authority to pause and reflect. His calm approach, focused on education rather than retaliation, emphasized the importance of integrity and patience in shaping the behavior of others. The officers seemed to struggle with their emotions, caught between acknowledgement of their error and the discomfort of confrontation with the truth. He maintained a steady presence, not forcing the conversation, allowing them to reach understanding at their own pace. His calm and respectful demeanor acted as a mirror, reflecting the impact of their behavior without anger or aggression. He continued speaking, highlighting practical steps that could help prevent similar mistakes in the future. Listen carefully to people, observe without judgment, and think before you act. Your role carries authority but also responsibility. Each decision affects real lives. Treat every individual with fairness and the law will serve its true purpose. His voice was calm, yet the message was strong. The officers nodded slowly, beginning to understand the lesson in a deeper way. A silence fell over the room, not heavy this time, but reflective. The officers were absorbing the guidance and he remained composed, letting the weight of the lesson settle. Witnesses, though quiet, were also affected, sensing the powerful combination of patience, dignity, and quiet authority. The room had transformed from a place of tension and misunderstanding to one of learning and introspection. He reflected internally on the human capacity for change. People often act hastily or under pressure, but awareness, acknowledgement, and guidance could redirect actions toward fairness. His presence, calm and composed throughout the ordeal, had created an environment where learning could occur. It was a demonstration that even in situations of injustice, influence could be exerted through integrity and quiet strength. One officer, finally finding his voice, asked a question about handling similar situations in the future. He responded with practical advice, emphasizing patience, observation, and the importance of respecting every person regardless of appearance. He spoke calmly, using experience and clarity to guide rather than criticizing. The officers listened intently, a mix of relief and humility in their expressions, recognizing the opportunity to improve their conduct. The encounter stretched on, filled with quiet instruction, reflection, and acknowledgement. He maintained his composure, continuing to answer questions, share insights, and model calm authority. The officers' initial hostility had transformed into cautious respect, and the room was filled with a sense of resolution, though the lessons would take time to fully integrate. Throughout the conversation, he was aware of the witnesses, the subtle documentation of the interaction, and the potential impact beyond the station walls. His calm, measured behavior, combined with clear and respectful guidance, served as an example for everyone observing. The power of composure, patience, and integrity became evident in the unfolding moment, demonstrating that even challenging and unjust encounters could be transformed into opportunities for growth and learning. Finally, after hours of conversation, reflection, and guidance, the officers seemed to reach a deeper understanding. Their earlier actions, though wrong, had become a teaching moment. He remained composed, observing the change in demeanor, ready to respond to any further questions or needs for clarification. His calm authority had not only ensured his own safety and dignity, but had also created a space for meaningful learning and reflection. He realized the power of patience and integrity in shaping outcomes, influencing behavior and teaching lessons. The confrontation had shifted from a moment of injustice to one of education and growth, a transformation facilitated by calm, measured, and respectful behavior. The officers, witnesses, and even he himself had experienced a moment of human learning, one that would resonate far beyond the walls of the station. As the night deepened, the atmosphere remained charged with understanding and reflection. He continued to answer questions, provide guidance, and model calm authority. The officer's demeanor had shifted from arrogance to humility, from tension to attentive respect. The experience, while stressful and unjust, had become an opportunity to demonstrate the power of patience, dignity, and clear communication. He remained composed, understanding that the lessons from this night would have long-lasting impact on those involved and those who would hear of it later. The night was slowly winding down, yet the tension from earlier events still lingered in the police station. He had been calm, composed, and patient throughout the ordeal, and now the atmosphere had transformed from one of hostility to quiet reflection. The officers, once aggressive and dismissive, were now more subdued, grappling with the weight of their mistakes and the lessons they had learned. He remained seated, maintaining the same calm demeanor that had guided him from the start, letting the gravity of the situation sink in for everyone involved. As the officers finalized their reports and paperwork, he listened quietly, offering clarification only when necessary. His presence was measured and firm, demonstrating that dignity and respect could coexist even in moments of profound injustice. The realization that he had been wrongly arrested had shifted the room's dynamics, and he could see subtle signs of reflection in the officer's body language. Shoulders that had been tense were slowly relaxing, and their eyes no longer avoided contact but held a mixture of respect and contemplation. He thought about the broader implications of the night. How often had he witnessed or heard of similar situations where assumptions and biases led to unnecessary conflict and humiliation? He reflected on the importance of using personal experiences as opportunities for growth, not only for himself but for others. The encounter at the gas station had become more than an arrest. It had become a moment to demonstrate patience, dignity, and the power of calm authority. He realized that even in the most unfair circumstances, it was possible to influence others positively by maintaining integrity. The officers seemed to struggle with their emotions, attempting to reconcile their initial assumptions with the truth they now faced. He could see hesitation, embarrassment, and a growing understanding of how their actions could have had serious consequences. He did not gloat or offer judgment. Instead, he allowed the weight of the situation to guide the conversation naturally. His calm presence served as a reminder that influence is often stronger when paired with patience and composure, rather than anger or confrontation. One officer finally spoke, his voice quieter than before, filled with hesitation and uncertainty. "We didn't realize. We acted too quickly. We should have." He trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. He nodded slightly, acknowledging the honesty without anger. "Acknowledging the mistake is the first step," he said, his voice calm and measured. "Learning from it is the next. This situation can guide better decisions in the future." The words were simple but carried weight, a reminder that growth often comes from reflection and accountability. He reflected internally on the power of quiet authority. By maintaining composure and responding with clarity and respect, he had demonstrated a form of influence that words alone could not convey. The officers were